My mom left me an old house in Tuscany. My wife sold it without my consent when I was on a business trip. My wife said, "Old junk, what do you need it for?" And then I got a letter from the buyer, and I realized that my wife had forged the power of attorney. Now she lives in a hostel in Milan, and I'm in the same house, with a new lock and a new will. It had been a long day in Berlin, meetings with clients, endless emails, the usual grind. Business trips were never the break I needed, but they paid the bills. As I sank into the hotel chair, I checked the clock on my phone. 10:37 p.m., late enough that I'd missed all calls back home, though it didn't matter. Emma, my wife, never called me during work hours. She was practical that way, too consumed with managing things at home to check in. I told myself it didn't bother me anymore. She was independent, and that was a virtue, or so I had convinced myself. I opened my laptop to send a few last emails before bed when my phone buzzed. It was a notification from my inbox. At first, I thought it was just spam. I'd been getting a lot of unsolicited offers lately, especially with all the travel. But then I noticed the subject line: notification of sale, property in Tuscany. I froze. Tuscany? My mother's house. I hadn't thought about the house in years. I knew it was still there, an old stone villa nestled in the Tuscan hills. The kind of house that was more of a family legacy than a practical asset. My mother had been insistent that it stay in the family, though. To be honest, it never meant much to me. I had my life here in the city with Emma. The house was just, well, old stuff. But to sell it without telling me? I clicked open the email, my heart beating a little faster. The letter inside was from a law firm, detailing the sale of the property. It stated that the house had been sold to a private buyer and that the transaction had been completed, with payment transferred. There was a small clause about the transfer of ownership, but that didn't matter at first. What mattered was the date. The sale had happened 3 weeks ago. I stared at the screen. My first thought was of Emma. She'd never been a fan of the house. I could almost hear her voice now. Why keep a place like that? It's just gathering dust. It's not worth anything anymore. She'd always been the pragmatic one, even when it came to my mother's legacy. Emma was practical, some might say too practical, and always believed in cutting losses. So yes, I could imagine her selling the house, thinking it was the smart choice. But to sell it without telling me? That was something else entirely. There was no mention of my consent. There was no mention of any discussion. Just a cold, dry statement that the house was gone. And then, below the details of the sale, was the buyer's information. A man named Luca Valenti, a name I didn't recognize. I couldn't breathe. The room suddenly felt too small. The walls felt like they were closing in. I hadn't even had the chance to mourn the loss of my mother, really. She had died unexpectedly, and I hadn't had the time to process it all. But now this betrayal stung in a way I couldn't explain. I immediately texted Emma, my fingers shaking a little as I typed. "What is this? Why didn't you tell me about the house?" The response came after a few minutes. Not a call, a message. "It's just an old house. What difference does it make? I thought you'd be happy to be rid of it." I could hear her voice in my head as I read those words. Dismissive, practical, impersonal. That was Emma. Everything had a price, and everything was either an asset or a liability. But this was different. It wasn't just the house. It wasn't just the money. It was the fact that she had sold something that was mine, something my mother had left to me, and I hadn't even been consulted. I called her immediately. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. I stood up and walked around the room. My mind raced, the anger slowly boiling up. How could she do this? I had always thought I knew her, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. The message that followed only deepened the confusion. "Relax. I took care of everything. The sale went through smoothly. You don't need to worry about it. We can start fresh." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Start fresh? Start fresh? She'd taken everything out from under me, and now she was asking me to just move on? I could feel my pulse in my throat, a mix of frustration, betrayal, and disbelief. I wanted to pick up the phone and shout at her, to demand an explanation, but I couldn't, I wouldn't. Instead, I did what I knew how to do best. I started thinking. I went through the email again, carefully. The lawyer had attached the sale contract, the buyer's details, even the notarized copy of the power of attorney. I frowned. Power of attorney? I opened the attached documents, scanning through the legal jargon. But when I reached the power of attorney, my heart stopped. There at the bottom of the document was a signature. My signature. At first, I thought I had misread it. How could it be? I hadn't signed anything like this. My mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. But it was clear. Someone had forged my signature. Someone had used it to authorize the sale of the house. It hit me all at once. Emma. She'd forged my signature. I let the weight of it sink in for a moment. My wife, the woman I trusted, the woman I had built a life with, had just stolen something from me, and not just anything, my family's legacy, my inheritance. But it wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the house. It was the betrayal, the utter disregard for me, for my mother's memory. And then, with a sinking feeling in my stomach, I realized something else. Emma didn't just sell the house. She'd stolen from me. And now it was time for me to take it back. I didn't sleep that night. The hotel room with its sterile beige walls and dim lighting felt like a cage. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Emma had planned this. She'd sold the house, forged my signature, and kept me in the dark, all while I was halfway across the world. By morning, my mind was already racing with ideas of what to do next. I couldn't just sit back and let this go. This wasn't just about property or money. It was about respect, about the trust I had placed in her, and that trust had been shattered. But how could I prove it? I called the lawyer's office in Tuscany first thing. The person who answered the phone was polite, almost too polite. I asked for details about the sale, but they wouldn't give me much. I wasn't the buyer after all. I wasn't even the seller on record. But I could tell by the tone in his voice that something was off. "Do you mind if I ask who authorized the transaction?" I pressed. The lawyer's voice tightened. "The power of attorney was granted by you, Mr. Rossi, just as the documents indicate. It's all in order." I didn't miss the hesitation in his voice. Something was wrong. No matter how smooth they tried to make it sound, I knew this wasn't just a simple sale. There were lies buried underneath. "I'll be in Tuscany in a few days," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I even thought about them. "Please hold off on anything further until then." I hung up the phone, not giving him a chance to respond. I needed to be there. I needed to see the house for myself, to understand what had really happened. But there was more I needed to do before I could go. I needed to understand how Emma had pulled this off. I called a private investigator I'd worked with on a few smaller matters in the past. His name was Carlo, a sharp, no-nonsense guy with a knack for finding out things that weren't meant to be found. He picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Rossi, what can I do for you?" "I need information," I said. "I need to find out everything about the sale of a property in Tuscany. The buyer, the lawyer, anything and everything connected to this sale." "Understood. Give me the details, I'll start digging." We agreed on a price and I ended the call, hoping it would be enough to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, I started my own investigation. I went back to the documents, looking at the power of attorney again, examining the signatures, comparing the handwriting. My own signature was forged, that much was obvious, but the question was, how? Who had done it? As I stared at the paper, my mind kept returning to the same thought. Emma. I couldn't wrap my head around it, but everything pointed to her. She had the motive. She had always been obsessed with the idea of useless assets. The house, to her, was nothing more than an inconvenience, a weight that tied us down. But for me, it was more. It was a part of my heritage, a piece of my past that connected me to my mother, to a life before the corporate grind. I remembered the last conversation I'd had with Emma before my trip. We'd been sitting in the kitchen, the sunlight filtering through the window. She'd been going on about the house as she often did. "It's old. It's falling apart. What's the point of keeping it?" she had said, her voice tinged with impatience. We could sell it, use the money for something practical. I had brushed it off at the time, as I always did. I didn't see the harm in letting her vent. She had a way of making things sound so reasonable, so practical. But I hadn't realized then that she had already made her decision, that she had already forged my consent, that she was already planning to sell the house out from under me. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the anger that was building inside me. I needed to stay calm. I couldn't let emotions cloud my judgment. Not now, not when I was so close to figuring this out. The phone call from Carlo came later that afternoon. He had some initial information for me. The buyer's a man named Luca Valenti, he said. He's a private investor, but I couldn't find much on him. No major public dealings. He's not a high-profile figure. I frowned. That didn't tell me much. What about the lawyer? His name is Fabio Moretti. I've spoken to a few contacts in Tuscany. He's well known, but nothing unusual about him. He's not involved in any shady dealings, at least not that we know of. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers running over the edge of the desk. There was nothing concrete yet, just a few names, a few leads. But none of it made sense. Why would someone like Valenti buy an old house in Tuscany? Why would he be involved in a private sale with a forged power of attorney? It felt like a setup, a scheme. But for what? Carlo's voice brought me back to the moment. I'll keep digging, Mr. Rossi. In the meantime, I'd recommend you head to Tuscany as planned. Maybe you'll find something that connects the dots. I agreed, hanging up the phone with a sense of urgency building inside me. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about everything I had built with Emma, everything I had trusted her with, and now I had to figure out how far this betrayal went. I booked a flight for the following morning, knowing that the answers I needed were waiting for me in Tuscany. I had to confront Emma. I had to get to the bottom of this, and I had to make sure I got back what was mine, no matter the cost. The next morning, as I packed my bag, I realized one thing with absolute certainty. This was only the beginning, and I was going to make things right. I didn't know what to expect when I finally arrived in Tuscany. The familiar landscape of rolling hills and vineyards greeted me like an old friend. Yet everything felt different. The house, my mother's house, stood like a silent sentinel against the horizon. It had always been a place of memories, of family, and now it felt like a relic I had lost. I drove up the winding path, the gravel crunching beneath my tires. The moment I parked in front of the house, I could feel the weight of it all. The air smelled of earth and old stone, a scent that once brought me comfort. Now it felt like betrayal hung in the very air. The house was as I remembered it, weathered but still beautiful in its own way, with ivy creeping up the walls and the soft sound of birds in the distance. I couldn't help but feel the sting of it. This was my inheritance, the legacy my mother had left me. And now it wasn't even mine anymore. Or was it? I walked up to the front door, the key still in my pocket. But when I twisted the handle, it didn't budge. The lock was new. Someone had changed it. I tried to keep my composure, but the frustration bubbled up inside me. I was close to finding the answers, but now I was at a dead end. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for the lawyer, Fabio Moretti. It rang a few times before he picked up. Mr. Rossi, he greeted me, his tone polite but distant. I was expecting your call. You sold my house without my consent, I said, cutting straight to the point. How could you do that? There was a long pause before he responded. Mr. Rossi, I assure you, everything was done according to the law. The power of attorney was signed, and all the necessary paperwork was completed. Don't lie to me, I snapped, my anger rising. That power of attorney was forged. It's not my signature. I never signed anything. Moretti's voice faltered. I'm afraid I cannot discuss the details with you, Mr. Rossi. The transaction was legitimate, and the matter is now closed. I clenched my jaw, trying to remain calm. If that's the case, why won't you meet me in person? I want to see the documents. I'm afraid that would not be possible at this time, he said quickly. And then there was a click as the line went dead. I stood there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. My instincts were screaming at me. Moretti knew something. He was hiding something, and I wasn't going to let it slide. I called Carlo next. I need everything on this lawyer and the buyer, especially any financial connections. Dig deeper. I need something solid. I'm already on it, he replied, his voice calm, confident. I'll have more information for you soon. Just keep the pressure up. I ended the call, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that Moretti and Valenti were part of something bigger. I wasn't just dealing with a shady property deal. There was a network at play here, and Emma, she was at the center of it. I knew I couldn't confront her yet, not until I had all the pieces of the puzzle. I needed to understand the full scope of her betrayal to see how deep this ran. So I spent the next few days going through the house trying to gather anything that could give me a clue. My mother's old things were scattered everywhere. Photographs, old letters, heirlooms that had once been important. Now they felt like ghosts, memories of a life I could no longer access. I found an old ledger in the attic. It was leather-bound and worn with age, but the handwriting inside was unmistakable. My mother's. It detailed the history of the house, her struggles to maintain it, the repairs, the debts. But what caught my eye was a note at the end. Ensure the house remains in the family. It holds more value than just money. Promise me you won't sell it. My heart sank. It was a letter to me, a final request. And Emma had ignored it, had gone against my mother's wishes without a second thought. But there was no time to dwell on that. Carlo called later that afternoon with some good news. I've got something, he said. Valenti's company, the one that bought your house, has been involved in several shady real estate deals over the past few years. Nothing overtly illegal, but some of the transactions raise red flags. I've sent you the details. I opened the file Carlo sent me. There were multiple reports about Valenti's dealings with properties in Tuscany. The name kept popping up in connection with companies that specialized in distressed properties, homes that were either abandoned or undervalued. It was starting to make sense. Valenti was buying properties under questionable circumstances, and my house was just another one in a long line. I sat back in my chair, feeling the pieces click together. This wasn't just about money. It was about Emma being too comfortable with cutting corners, too eager to profit from things she didn't understand. She'd sold the house to Valenti because she knew it had value, but she didn't care about its history. She saw it as a means to an end, and I had been too blind to see it. I called her, my hands trembling as I dialed her number. It rang 3 times before she picked up. Hello? She said, her voice warm, as if nothing had happened. Emma, I said, my voice cold. You sold the house, without telling me, without my consent, and I want to know why. There was a long pause on the other end. Then finally she spoke. I did what needed to be done, she said, her voice defensive. You were never going to do anything with that house. It was just sitting there wasting away. It's better off in someone else's hands. You don't get it, do you? I said, the anger bubbling up again. It wasn't about the house. It was about family. It was about my mother's legacy. You destroyed that. You've destroyed everything. There was silence, and then she sighed. Look, I did what I thought was best. You were always busy, always gone. I made a decision. I thought it was the right one. The coldness in her voice sent a chill through me. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even acknowledging the magnitude of what she had done. You're going to regret this, I said, my words deliberate. You'll see. I'm going to make this right. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. I knew then that nothing could fix what had been broken. Not between us. Not in the way I had hoped. And that was when I made my decision. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about restoring the balance. It was about justice, and I was going to make sure I got it, no matter the cost. I knew what I had to do. The past few days had revealed everything. Emma's betrayal, Valenti's shady dealings, and the ugly truth about how deep the corruption ran. This wasn't just a business transaction gone wrong. This was a carefully orchestrated plot, and I was going to make sure everyone involved paid for their part. But before I could move forward, I needed to solidify my position. I wasn't going to rush into this blindly. I had one chance to get it right, and I wasn't about to waste it. The first thing I did was contact Carlo again. I need you to dig deeper into Valenti. Find out everything. Every illegal move he's made, every person he's crossed. I want a list of his enemies, anyone who might have a reason to take him down. Carlo hesitated. Are you sure about this? Once you start going after him, there's no turning back. I've already turned back, I said, my voice steady. Get it done. Within hours, Carlo had come through. He had compiled a detailed report on Valenti's business practices and personal history. It was a goldmine. There were rumors of dirty deals, bribes to local officials, and even a few unsolved cases of property theft, all pointing back to Valenti's company. But what caught my eye the most was a recent land deal involving an abandoned estate in the nearby hills. Valenti had purchased the property at a fraction of its value, but there was something off about the transaction. The sale had been completed within days of a mysterious death. A landowner who had refused to sell. A man with a reputation for being tough. The pieces were starting to align, and I knew that if I could expose Valenti for what he really was, I could destroy everything he had built. I started with Emma. She was still living in the house I had once called home, and I knew she had no idea what was coming. I wasn't going to confront her directly. No, I would let her see the consequences of her actions in a way she'd never expect. I wanted her to feel the sting of her betrayal without me having to lift a finger. I began by leaking the information to the press. It wasn't a full expose yet, just a few well-placed rumors about Valenti's unsavory dealings. But it was enough. The media latched onto it, and soon, whispers started circulating through the small town. The local real estate market went into a frenzy. People began to question whether they were being swindled by Valenti's company, and the authorities were forced to investigate. But that was just the beginning. I had another weapon in my arsenal, the power of the land itself. I knew that Valenti had pushed to sell off parts of the estate, hoping to make a profit from it. He didn't realize it, but that land was more valuable than he could ever imagine, and I was about to make sure he couldn't touch it. I'd made a few calls, arranged for certain documents to disappear, and suddenly the property was tied up in legal limbo. No one could sell it. Not Valenti, not anyone. Meanwhile, Carlo was making progress on the front lines. The more we dug into Valenti's past, the more skeletons we uncovered. But one discovery in particular sent a chill down my spine. Valenti wasn't just a businessman. He was a player in something much larger. There were connections to organized crime, ties with people who were untouchable. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that going after him directly could be dangerous. I couldn't fight this battle alone. I needed leverage. That's when I remembered the landowner, the one who had died mysteriously. He had a daughter, a woman in her mid-30s, living in Rome. She had been the rightful heir to the estate, but her father's death had complicated matters. She wasn't part of the equation anymore, but she could be. She could be the ally I needed. I found her through a mutual contact, someone who had been close to her father. Her name was Isabella. The moment I spoke to her, I knew she was just as driven by vengeance as I was. Her father had been a hard man, but he'd built something lasting. Valenti had destroyed that, just like he destroyed everything else. I want to take him down, Isabella told me, her voice as cold as mine. But I need something more than just money or revenge. I want justice, and I'll help you get it. But you have to promise me something. What's that? I asked, already knowing the answer. We take him down slowly. We make him feel every loss, every betrayal, and when he's finally on his knees, we deliver the final blow. I didn't hesitate. Agreed. And so our alliance was formed. I had a plan. It wasn't just about getting back at Emma or Valenti. It was about something bigger, about bringing down a corrupt empire, about exposing the truth. But most of all, it was about watching them all fall. Isabella and I began working together, gathering more evidence, applying pressure where it hurt. We started with Valenti's most trusted employees, the ones closest to him. Slowly but surely, we turned them against him, one by one. It was all part of the plan. As we approached the final stage, I could feel the tension building. The air was thick with anticipation. Emma, Valenti, and everyone else who had wronged me would soon face the consequences. They had no idea what was coming, but I wasn't going to stop until they did. I called Carlo one last time. "Is it done?" I asked, my voice cold and calm. "Almost," he replied. "Everything's set up. The press is ready, the documents are in place, and the authorities are already sniffing around Valenti. It won't be long now." "Good," I said. "I want them to feel it, every last bit of it." And so, the pieces of my plan fell into place. The final act was about to begin, and when it did, there would be no turning back.